Just over 2 weeks ago, the Australian government, with bipartisan support, signed an historic agreement with the Indigenous people of Australia who are still seeking justice for their people. In today's Gospel, we have the story of an Indigenous woman of another land at another time, seeking help for her daughter. We might hear this story through the lens of all First Nations mothers crying out on behalf of their children. We might also bring our story into dialogue with the cry of the mothers of Lebanon in the wake of last Tuesday's horrific explosion that brought death and disaster to an already deeply afflicted nation. Matthew's Gospel story presents us with an encounter between the Galilean Jesus and a woman of the region of Tyre and Sidon, part of the land now known as Lebanon. The story culminates in the healing of the woman's daughter, maybe a little girl or even a young woman, who is present only as the subject of the conversation between the two main characters. Her mother is known to Matthew's community simply as a Canaanite woman. In other words, she is an Indigenous woman, a descendant of the original inhabitants of the land that was occupied by the Israelite people in the 13th century BCE. Like the uncounted Jewish women of the feeding stories, she is unnamed. To some early Christian communities, she is Justa with a J. We might therefore reasonably call her daughter Justina. Justa comes to Jesus as he moves from Jewish territory into or close to non-Jewish territory. In the language of Jewish liturgy, eleison me Kyrie, have mercy. She laments loudly and persistently for her daughter, since her daughter, Justina, is severely tormented by a demon. The Gospels are written in Greek and often have to be understood against a Greek philosophical background. For the ancient Greeks, the antithesis of demonic possession or torment is human flourishing or well-being. Eudaimonia. Eudaimonia means having a good guardian spirit, as opposed to a malevolent spirit that impairs a person's well-being and sense of self. Justina's well-being is in jeopardy. Her distraught mother is an outsider to the house of Israel, who is nonetheless familiar with Israel's prayer of lament. Have mercy. She is a woman alone in public space, risking ridicule and rejection to find healing for her daughter. The immediate response to her plea is silence. Jesus does not answer her a word. Is he ignoring her cry for help? Is he simply stunned, taken aback at the vehemence of her request? Is he rendered speechless by the simple fact that she should dare to cross the boundaries of gender and ethnicity in this way? Is he in awe at her courage and faith from the outset? All we know is that he says nothing and that the disciples characteristically, tell him to send her away. He responds by defining the limits of his mission rather narrowly. He was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Justa is not deterred from her mission by this seeming rejection. She begs Jesus to help her, and then receives an explicit refusal in a very confronting image in which Jesus names his people as the children and her people as the dogs. It is not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. She accepts his statement as a challenge and beats him in the exchange. Even the dogs eat the crumbs. The bread is not only for the house of Israel. All the peoples of the earth have a right to the bread. Jesus' own horizons are expanded by the persistence and insight of this woman. Justa's faith is affirmed as great, and her daughter is healed. Justa is vindicated and Justina restored to a state of well-being. Justina has her counterparts across the globe, especially in these troubled times of pandemic. While older people are more susceptible to infection, the young are by no means exempt. They are deeply affected in many other ways and will continue to be affected by the economic and social impacts of COVID-19. Justa has her many counterparts in Lebanon as it faces devastation in the present and uncertainty in the future. Every day since that cataclysmic explosion in the Beirut port, I have heard Justa crying out for mercy for her people. The challenge for us is to be Justa in our times for the sake of all in the earth community, human and other than human. To be Justa for all whose well-being is impaired by political and judicial corruption, as seems to be the case in Lebanon, by lack of action on the climate crisis, by the disturbance of right relationship between Earth's species, by illness or fear, in short, by lack of universal access to the means to flourish. As we take up the challenge, we take heart from the courage of Justa, the feisty borderland woman who refused to go away, the woman who moved the heart of Jesus of Nazareth to embrace the pain of those beyond the house of Israel. Thank God for the Justas of this world.